I thought I was attending my boyfriend's cousin's wedding until the groom turned around, and it was him. The man I loved was marrying someone else. I arrived in Napa at dawn, the air crisp, the vineyards row upon row of green stretching into the light. I looked out the window of the rental car and took a deep breath. I thought this was going to be the kind of weekend we celebrated love quietly under trees. I'd flown across the country to join him, my boyfriend Matt, and what he told me was his cousin's wedding at a vineyard estate. I tried not to think about how fancy the invites were or how high-end the flowers looked. I told myself it was just a nice gesture, a surprise weekend away. The sun rose higher, and we arrived at the estate gates, the kind of place you see in wedding magazines. White chairs aligned on a lawn, a wooden arch, draped in white chiffon and green leaves. I smiled and adjusted my dress a soft blush color, wondering when I'd see Matt again. He had slipped away to greet people. I hovered by the guest book table and sipped champagne, feeling light and excited. I told myself I wasn't overthinking it. I wanted to just enjoy. Moments later, Matt came over, his suit crisp, the boutonniere pinned to his lapel. He looked handsome. I felt proud to be with him. Even though he said we would hang back quietly, he wanted me to meet some of his family first. I nodded, and we walked together toward a group of people he introduced me to: cousins, uncles, aunties, injecting names I tried to memorize. The breeze moved through the vines, the light laughing voices, and the feeling that everything was perfect. Then I saw her, the bride, beautiful in white, stepping onto the lawn, her eyes sweeping the guests, and my heart skipped. I assumed it must be his cousin, the bride. She looked radiant, and for a moment I caught Matt's gaze flick toward her, then away. My mind shrugged away the little ping that said something was off. It was just a cousin after all, and cousins matter. I gathered myself, I smiled at the bride, offered congratulations, and she hugged Matt warmly. They kissed on the cheek, and he turned to me and said, "This is her cousin Sophie, meet Jenna." He smiled at me, and I nodded. I felt welcomed, still a little nervous, but happy. The ceremony began, bells chimes, light laughter as people settled. I found a seat near the front row side with Matt's family. I looked across the lawn at the arch and thought how fairy tale this looked. I whispered to Matt, "Are you happy you did this here?" He nodded. I always dreamed of this place. I smiled. Then the officiant cleared his throat and asked everyone to rise. The bride appeared at the arch. The groom came from the opposite direction. My heart jumped because I recognized the groom. It was Matt. It was him. But it couldn't be. I froze in my seat, my mind racing. Why was my boyfriend walking toward the altar as the groom? My stomach dropped as murmurs rose in the crowd. I glanced at Matt's hand and I realized the ring on his finger, the gold band newly placed. My mind couldn't catch up. I was at his wedding. I wasn't the bride. I was the guest who loved the groom. What do you do when the person you love stands up in front of you and vows to someone else? What would you do if you flew across the country for a wedding and something felt off the moment you arrived? It felt like the world tilted, the vines blurred, and the white chairs, the flowers, the most perfect of dreams, suddenly cracked open at the sides. I saw the bride standing opposite him, her smile bright and genuine, and I forced a polite clap. My mind screamed, but my voice stayed in control. I looked at Matt, his expression calm, composed, polished like a groom, but I only knew him as my boyfriend, the man who said he loved me, the man who whispered late-night secrets and kissed me goodbye at the airport, and now he was standing there, about to promise forever to someone else. I stood up as everyone did and tried to walk forward to the aisle. Feel hands clasped my chest tight. I swallowed the connection of reality and the lie of expectations. I heard my name being spoken by his aunt. I felt her hand on my arm. "Jenna, dear, are you all right?" I nodded, though my legs wobbled. I focused on the bride, who looked at me and nodded too, as if acknowledging my presence as usual guest. I wondered how many people here knew the story I didn't know. A bouquet of pale roses drifted in front of me, the scent sweet, almost comforting. I glanced at Matt one last time before the vows. The officiant began, "Dear friends, we are gathered," and time slowed. I listened to his voice and tried to understand the words, but all I heard was his name being said not as Matt, my love, but Matt and Sophie, and the word wife. My heart pounded. I looked around the crowd, searching for a sign, some reaction, some gasp, but everyone was smiling at him, looking at him as he was meant to be the groom. My chest felt heavy. I fought tears. I thought about all the dinners we had walked hand in hand where he said one day, "Maybe we will move somewhere nice together." I remembered his phone call saying, "Book your ticket, I've got a surprise for you." I had believed love, and it was real, but maybe not for me. The rings were exchanged. The audience applauded. He kissed his bride and turned to wave at his family and friends. I realized I was frozen at the edge of this moment, a spectator in someone else's story. I forced myself to sit down when invited. I folded my hands in my lap. My mind raced with questions. Why didn't he tell me? Did he love me at all? Was I just a placeholder? The breeze stirred the vineyard leaves and a glass tinkled, and I heard my own shallow breath. I glanced at Sophie, the bride. She looked serene, confident. Did she know? Was she in on this surprise? Or was she also blind to the truth? I forced myself to breathe. I promised I would not ruin this moment, not yet. Not until I had more answers. Have you ever ignored a small gut feeling and later wished you hadn't? The applause echoed around me, and I couldn't even hear myself breathe. My hands trembled slightly as people stood up and moved toward the reception area. I followed slowly, pretending to look at my phone because I didn't trust my face to stay neutral. I wanted to run away, scream, hide, yet something inside me kept whispering, "Stay until you know everything." The reception was under a large white canopy filled with laughter, clinking glasses, music so elegant it hurt my chest. I stood by the wine table pretending to admire the bottles, but my eyes kept scanning for Matt. He was surrounded by people shaking hands, hugging family, posing for photos, his arm around her waist as if it belonged there. My fingers tightened around the glass stem. Every photo flashed like a dagger. He had told me he wasn't ready for commitment, that he needed more time, that his cousin's wedding might make him emotional. He hadn't said he was the groom. I thought maybe there had been some insane mistake. Maybe it was a setup for a TV show or prank. But the look in his eyes when he saw me standing there told me the truth. He froze for a second, the slightest flicker of panic, and then he smiled again, mask perfectly back in place. He leaned to whisper something to Sophie, and she nodded, her hand resting on his chest. That simple touch broke me. I walked toward the vineyard rows away from the noise, the laughter, the joy that no longer belonged to me. The air was thick with the smell of wine and roses, the sun setting over the hills. I took out my phone, scrolled through our messages, his promises, the plans for after the wedding, the ones that no longer meant anything. My chest burned. I heard footsteps behind me and turned. It was him. Jenna, he said softly, the same voice that used to calm me. You shouldn't have come. My voice cracked. You invited me. He sighed, eyes full of guilt. I didn't think you'd actually show up. The words hit me like a slap. You lied, I said, every syllable trembling. You said this was your cousin's wedding. It's complicated, he said, running a hand through his hair. You were never supposed to find out like this. I laughed bitterly. How was I supposed to find out? When you changed your relationship status. He took a step closer, but I backed away. The vineyard shadows stretched long and the music floated from the distance, but between us was silence, sharp as glass. Jenna, please, he whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said. You didn't just hurt me. You humiliated me. He looked away, and for the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. I almost believed they were real. Would you confront someone who lied to you in public, or walk away silently and never look back? I didn't walk away. Not yet. Some invisible force kept me rooted there, needing to understand the reasons, even though they could never make sense. I whispered, tell me everything. All of it. He exhaled, shoulders slumping. Sophie and I, we were engaged before you. Things fell apart last year, but our families, they didn't know we split. The wedding was still planned. When I met you, I was lost. You made me feel alive again, but the pressure from both sides. I cut him off. So you married her to please them? He hesitated. I thought I could fix it later. I thought maybe we could figure it out quietly. I shook my head. Fix it later? After marrying someone else? The absurdity of his words made my anger sharper than my tears. The sun dipped lower, and I saw the golden light fading just like every promise he'd made. I loved you, I said, voice breaking. I know, he whispered. That's why I couldn't tell you. It was so twisted it almost sounded poetic. He didn't tell me because he cared. I stepped back. You didn't protect me. You protected yourself. He reached out, but I flinched. Don't, I said. You made your choice. Behind us, laughter rose again, the sound of celebration so cruelly beautiful it made me sick. He looked like he wanted to say more, but a voice called his name, Sophie's voice. He turned toward it automatically. That was my answer. I turned and started walking down the gravel path toward the parking area. Each step felt heavier but clearer too. The cool night air stung my face, drying the tears I hadn't realized were falling. I heard him call after me once, but I didn't stop. I reached my car, gripping the door handle, breathing hard. The vineyard glowed behind me, fairy lights flickering like tiny ghosts. I wanted to erase this place from my memory, but I knew it would always live there, the place where love turned into fiction. Before I left, I looked back one last time. From a distance, he looked perfect in that suit. Smiling again, arm around his new wife, the picture everyone would remember. I started the car and drove down the winding road until the music faded into nothing but the hum of my own heartbeat. What's worse, being lied to because someone feared losing you, or being told the truth too late to matter? Back in my apartment, everything felt smaller, quieter, like the walls were breathing around me, holding secrets they didn't want to tell. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne, the one he left on my scarf before we flew to Napa. I stood there in silence, staring at the half-open suitcase I never unpacked. Inside it were the clothes I wore to his wedding, the dress that now felt like a costume from a play I never auditioned for. I walked to the shelf where our photos sat, smiling at me like little lies trapped in frames. One at the beach, one at the cafe, one of him kissing my forehead. I lifted each frame, wiped the dust that hadn't even had time to gather, and placed them face down on the table. I couldn't throw them away yet, but I couldn't look either. Days turned into a blur of noise and numbness. My phone stayed on silent, my messages unread. Friends texted asking how the wedding was, and I typed the same 3 words every time. It was beautiful. No one needed to know the rest. The truth was too heavy to send through a screen. At night, I replayed the vows in my head, his voice steady as hands holding hers, the smile that once belonged to me. I wondered if he thought of me even for a second when he said forever. Maybe guilt flickered in his chest. Maybe it didn't. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks that looked like questions I'd never get answers to. Then one afternoon, a message came from an unknown number. Hey, Jenna, it read. I think we should talk. I know who you are. The name beneath it made my heart stop. Sophie. We met 2 days later at a cafe on 3rd Street. She looked flawless calm, like the same bride I saw under that arch. When she walked in, every head turned. She sat down across from me, her eyes steady but tired. I found out after the wedding, she said quietly. He told me you were an ex who couldn't let go. But then I saw your name on the flight list. You came with him. He lied to both of us. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that could make sense of any of it. I'm leaving him, she continued. I wanted you to hear it from me. He doesn't get to play us both and keep his smile. Her words were sharp but not cruel. There was strength in her calm. When she stood up to leave, she looked at me once more and said, don't let him define how you see love. You deserve something real. When she left, I sat there for a long time staring at her untouched coffee. For the first time since Napa, I felt something other than pain. It was release. Would you stay at a wedding if you realized you weren't in the place you thought you were? Weeks passed like slow-moving shadows stretching across the walls. I returned to work, but my mind stayed elsewhere, stuck between what happened and what I wished had happened. The office chatter felt distant, the laughter hollow. I smiled when people looked, but my eyes betrayed the truth. Healing isn't loud. It's the quiet moments when you sit still and realize your heart doesn't know how to beat the same way anymore. One morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. A real letter, not an email, not a text, just my name written in his handwriting. For a full minute, I held it like it might burn through my fingers. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, but curiosity is cruel, and I tore the envelope open anyway. The pages smelled faintly of wine and cologne. His words spilled across them, messy and uneven. He wrote, Jenna, I know I don't deserve a reply, I don't even deserve for you to read this. I just need you to know I'm sorry. I loved you in a way I didn't understand until it was too late. I thought I could balance both worlds, but I destroyed them instead. I read that line 3 times. The apology was real, maybe, but far too late. There are no awards for honesty after the betrayal's already been lived through. At the end of the letter, he said, Sophie's gone. She left me. Maybe I deserve that too. Then a single photo fell out. It was the wedding photo, him and Sophie under the arch, sunlight pouring through the vines. On the back he'd written, this should have been truth, not deceit. I stared at the photo until the edges blurred. My hands trembled, but not from sadness, from finality. This was his closure, not mine. That evening, I placed the letter and photo into the same box that held our pictures. I taped it shut, sealing years of laughter, lies, and love into a single cardboard tomb. I carried it to the recycling bin down the street and dropped it in. Watching it fall felt like releasing a ghost that had been following me since Napa. When I walked back home, the air felt lighter. I turned on some soft music, poured a glass of wine, and looked out at the city lights blinking like new beginnings. For the first time in months, I smiled, not because I forgot, but because I remembered who I was before him. That night, I dreamt of the vineyard again. The rows of grapes glowed gold under the sun. Only this time, I wasn't watching him. I was walking alone barefoot, laughing at the wind, and somewhere deep inside me, I understood that peace had finally returned. How do you think you'd feel seeing your partner walk down the aisle in someone else's wedding? A month after that letter, I finally stopped counting the days since it all happened. Time, they say, doesn't heal everything. It just teaches you how to live with the ache differently. And slowly it did. I began to notice small things again. The smell of morning coffee, the hum of the city when it rains, the quiet comfort of a book on my nightstand that didn't remind me of anyone but me. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. It crept in quietly, through routines I had once abandoned. Then, one Saturday morning, my friend Mia convinced me to join her for a weekend trip. You need air, Jen. Different air, she insisted. So we drove 3 hours to the coast. The sea was endless, the wind harsh, and for the first time in forever, I didn't mind how unplanned everything felt. We sat on the sand watching the waves crash. I remember telling her, it's strange, Mia. I thought losing him would destroy me, but somehow it built something new inside me instead. She smiled, squeezing my hand. That's growth, not loss. That night, we joined a small bonfire gathering near the shore. People were laughing, singing, telling stories. It felt raw and real, no filters, no pretense. Among them was someone who caught my eye. He wasn't flashy or loud, just quiet, observant, kind. His name was Evan. He offered me a cup of hot cocoa and said, you look like someone who's been through a lot but still believes in sunsets. I laughed softly. Is that your way of saying I look tired? He grinned. No, it's my way of saying you look strong. We talked for hours that night about books, travel, heartbreak, and hope. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't feel the need to hide it. There was something gentle about the way he listened, like silence was allowed to exist between words. When I returned home, I didn't expect to hear from him again, but a few days later, he texted me. Did you watch the sunset today? It looked like the sea kept it just for you. And just like that, something shifted again. Not like before, not a dizzying fall, but a quiet step forward. We started talking daily. Little things first, songs, random photos, late night thoughts. There were no promises, no pressure, just connection. Sometimes I'd still wake up from dreams of the vineyard, of things that could have been, but now those memories didn't hurt. They felt like closed chapters, printed and bound somewhere far behind me. Evan and I met a few more times. Every meeting felt easy, unforced. I caught myself laughing more, thinking less, trusting again, just a little. One evening, as we watched the sunset together, he said, you don't have to rush, Jenna. I'll walk beside you, not ahead of you. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I believed someone meant it. Do you think people can truly fall in love again after being deeply betrayed? Evan and I started seeing each other more often, but it never felt rushed. We didn't label anything. We just existed together. Some evenings, we'd sit by the lake near his apartment, tossing pebbles into the water, watching the ripples fade. Other days, we'd cook simple dinners, pasta, maybe soup, and talk about everything except the past. He had this way of making silence feel like peace, not punishment. One night, he asked me, do you still think about him? I didn't answer right away. The wind was soft, brushing my hair across my face. Sometimes, I admitted, but not because I miss him. More like, I remember the girl who loved him. She was naive, but she was brave too. Evan nodded. You don't have to forget her. Just don't live like her anymore. His words stayed with me. I realized healing wasn't about pretending the pain never existed. It was about learning how to walk with it without tripping every step. A few weeks later, he invited me to his sister's art show. It was in downtown Napa, ironically close to the same vineyard where everything once shattered. Part of me hesitated. The thought of going back to that place made my stomach twist. But another part of me whispered, you're stronger now. So I went. The night was beautiful. Strings of lights, music in the background, laughter spilling into the air. His sister's paintings were vivid and emotional. They told stories of heartbreak and renewal, much like mine. I found myself smiling, genuinely, as I moved from canvas to canvas. Then suddenly, my breath caught. Across the room, standing by the bar, was Ethan. He looked almost the same, maybe a little older, maybe a little tired. Our eyes met for a second that felt like an eternity. He froze, and I could see the realization hit him. His lips parted as if to speak, but I turned away before he could. My heart pounded, but not from pain, just from the shock of the past colliding with the present. Evan noticed my unease and walked up beside me. You okay? I took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, just ghosts. He didn't ask more. He just reached for my hand, and somehow that gesture anchored me. Ethan didn't approach me, and I didn't go near him. For the first time, I didn't need closure. I already had it. Seeing him there didn't reopen wounds. It simply confirmed they'd healed. As we left, I glanced one last time over my shoulder. Ethan was watching us walk out, alone, and I realized the wedding that wasn't mine was never meant to be. What I thought was an ending had just been life redirecting me somewhere better. When Evan drove me home, he said softly, You looked at him like someone who's already free. And I smiled because I was. If you accidentally ran into someone who once broke your heart, would you talk to them or walk away like Jenna did? That night, after running into Ethan, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange life was, how people who once meant everything could suddenly become just familiar strangers. I didn't feel sadness anymore, just gratitude that the pain had shaped me, not destroyed me. The next morning, I made coffee, sat by my window, and finally opened a journal I hadn't touched in years. On the first page, I'd written, "One day I'll understand why everything happened the way it did." And that day had quietly arrived. I started writing again, not about heartbreak, but about renewal. I wrote about Evan, about the way he never tried to fix me, just accepted me where I was, about how laughter returned slowly, like light through half-closed blinds, and how love, real love, wasn't fireworks. It was warmth that didn't burn. Evan showed up later that day with breakfast sandwiches and a tiny succulent plant. "You looked like you needed something alive around here," he teased. I laughed, placing it by the window. "Something green that won't leave me," I joked, and he smiled softly. "I'm not planning to." Weeks passed. The air between us grew heavier with unspoken things, comfort, affection, maybe love. But neither of us rushed to say it. One evening, as we walked through the farmer's market, he asked, "Do you think everything happens for a reason?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe not everything, but sometimes the worst things lead us to the right people. He nodded, his eyes warm under the fading sunset. "Then I guess I owe your past a thank you." That night, we sat on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sharing quiet moments that felt endless. The city glowed below us, and for once, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't questioning, doubting, or looking over my shoulder. I was just here. After a while, he turned to me. "Jenna, I know you've been through more than I can imagine, and I don't want to rush anything, but I just need you to know I'm here for real. I don't disappear." My chest tightened. His words weren't grand, they were steady, real. I whispered, "That's all I ever wanted. Someone who stays." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his hand lingering for a heartbeat. "Then I'll stay." For the first time since the vineyard, I let myself believe in a new kind of love, the kind that grows quietly, patiently, without needing proof. Later, as I closed my eyes that night, I realized the girl who once stood frozen at someone else's wedding had finally found her own beginning. Do you think true healing happens when you meet someone new, or when you finally make peace with yourself first? A year later, I found myself back in Napa Valley, but this time, by choice. Evan and I were attending a friend's wedding at a different vineyard, not far from where everything had once broken apart. The irony wasn't lost on me, but when I stepped out of the car and felt the same warm California sun on my skin, it didn't sting anymore. It just felt familiar. The ceremony was simple. Flowers, music, laughter drifting through the vines. Everyone looked so alive, so in love. I caught myself smiling, not because I was jealous, but because I finally understood that weddings weren't symbols of forever. They were moments of hope, and hope was something I'd reclaimed. Evan squeezed my hand as we found our seats. "You okay?" "Yeah," I whispered, just remembering. He smiled softly. "Then let's make better memories here." When the vows began, I didn't think of Ethan or the heartbreak or the lies. Instead, I thought of how life had quietly rewritten itself, how endings could turn into beginnings if you let them. Every word the couple spoke felt like a reminder that love, when real, doesn't demand perfection. It just asks for honesty. After the ceremony, as guests wandered toward the reception area, I slipped away for a moment. I walked along the edge of the vineyard, the sunset painting everything gold. I closed my eyes and let the breeze carry all the leftover ghosts away. I whispered softly, "Thank you for breaking me, because I would have never found myself if you hadn't." And I meant it. When I turned back, Evan was there holding 2 glasses of champagne. He raised one toward me. "To endings that weren't really endings," he said. I smiled. "And to beginnings that don't need fixing." We clinked glasses, the sound small but somehow sacred. He pulled me close, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was stepping into someone else's story. This one was mine. Later that night, we danced under string lights, barefoot on the grass. The air smelled of roses and earth. He whispered, "You look happy." "I am," I said, resting my head on his chest. "Finally." And I was. Life didn't give me the wedding I once imagined, but it gave me something better. Clarity, strength, and love that didn't need to be proved in front of a crowd. Love that lived quietly, truthfully, between 2 hearts that had learned what it meant to stay. As we left the vineyard, I looked up at the sky, soft shades of pink and silver, and realized the story wasn't called The Wedding That Wasn't Mine because it ended in loss. It was called that because it led me to the life that was. Sometimes, the things that break you are the very things that set you free. If you could go back to the moment your heart first broke, would you change it? Or would you let it happen knowing it shaped who you are now?